In the autumn of 1977, a liquidation merchant named Alan Smith, excavating the sub-basement of a condemned warehouse in North Hollywood, California, broke through a wall of living bedrock at the 40-foot depth and entered open space. Not a natural karst cavity, not a forgotten municipal utility tunnel, a working horizontally engineered subterranean vault running into absolute darkness. Its ceiling supported by massive, vitrified pillars left in place during what appeared to be an epochal excavation. The walls were smooth, bearing the iridescent scarring of immense thermal boring. On the floor lay crates, thousands of them, maybe hundreds of thousands, stacked with terrifying mechanical precision, stretching beyond the beam of his flashlight. They were abandoned in the dark as though whoever had stored them there simply walked off mid-shift and never came back. The earth above them had been sealed. The layers of strata that Smith had spent weeks driving his rented augers toward were a deliberate facade. Inside those crates was the physical anomaly that would silently rewrite the global hardware economy. Millions of hand tools, heavy drop-forged wrenches, ratchets, heavy hydraulic jacks, and impenetrable socket sets. They were coated in a thick amber-colored preservative sludge that smelled faintly of ozone and ancient sulfur. There was no dust. The ambient temperature of the vault hovered at exactly 48 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of the sweltering California heat wave radiating through the asphalt 40 feet above. The official narrative tells us that Harbor Freight Tools was founded in 1977, when Alan Smith and his son Eric opened a small mail-order tool business. They sourced cheap, liquidated inventory from struggling overseas manufacturers and selling them to the American public at impossibly low prices. We are told they built a multi-billion-dollar empire by aggressively cutting out the middleman and mastering the brutal economics of cheap overseas labor. But the physical evidence left behind in the North Hollywood bedrock tells a vastly different, deeply unsettling story. Harbor Freight did not manufacture their foundational inventory. They extracted it. This investigation follows three distinct threads, and each one leads deeper into the blank spaces of our history. We will first examine the hard thermodynamic impossibility of the earliest tools sold under their flagship labels, a grade of alloy that defies the known boundaries of 1970s metallurgical engineering. Second, we will track the deliberate documentary void, the erased property ledgers, the missing transit manifests, and the phantom zoning permits of Los Angeles County that mask a massive covert logistics operation. Finally, we will uncover the chilling macro pattern of subterranean mechanical caches discovered beneath other major industrial hubs across the globe, revealing a pre-existing infrastructure that mainstream archaeology violently refuses to acknowledge. If this investigation gets buried by the algorithm, subscribe now so you can find your way back. To understand the sheer impossibility of the North Hollywood cache, you must first understand the unforgiving, heat-soaked science of industrial metallurgy and the brutal economics of tool manufacturing. The official narrative insists that in the late 1970s, Harbor Freight sourced its initial mountain of inventory from cheap, unregulated foundries in East Asia. A standard drop-forged wrench from that era is manufactured through a violent, energy-intensive process. A billet of raw carbon steel is heated in an induction furnace until it glows a bright, translucent orange. It reaches temperatures upwards of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It is then placed between two massive hardened steel dies, and a mechanical hammer weighing several tons crashes down upon it. This forces the pliable metal into the shape of the tool. The wrench is heat-treated, quenched in oil, and finally electroplated with a thin layer of chromium to prevent catastrophic oxidation. This conventional process leaves an undeniable physical signature. If you take a standard 1977 Sears Craftsman wrench, slice it in half with a diamond saw, and examine it under a metallurgical electron microscope, you will see the grain flow of the steel. The microscopic crystalline lattice of the metal, warped, compressed, and distorted where the physical trauma of the drop forge forced it into its final geometry. You will also see microscopic stress fractures at the grain boundaries, the natural consequence of displacing hot metal and rapidly cooling it in chemical baths. This is the inescapable reality of human manufacturing. Yet, when independent materials scientists finally managed to acquire a pristine, uncirculated Pittsburgh-branded combination wrench from Harbor Freight's original 1978 mail-order catalog, sourced from the sealed estate of a retired aerospace machinist who had recognized its anomaly and hoarded it, The physical evidence completely dismantled the established timeline of human technology. Under scanning electron microscopy, this original early-era Harbor Freight wrench exhibited absolutely zero distortion in its grain flow. None. The crystalline lattice of the alloy was continuous, mathematically unbroken, and perfect from the center of the handle all the way out to the razor-sharp microscopic edges of the open end. The tool was not drop-forged. It was not cast in a sand mold. The atomic structure suggested that this fastener had been formed through a process of molecular deposition. Or perhaps cast in an engineered zero-gravity vacuum where molten metal could crystallize without the microscopic tearing caused by terrestrial atmospheric pressure, gravity, and thermal shock. Furthermore, the alloy itself was a staggering impossibility. Mainstream engineering relies on carbon steel tempered with precise ratios of chromium and vanadium to achieve high tensile strength and elasticity. The 1978 anomalous wrench possessed a tensile strength exceeding 350,000 pounds per square inch, an elasticity and hardness metric that dwarfs aerospace-grade titanium used in modern hypersonic missiles. But it contained no titanium. Spectrographic analysis revealed a matrix of hyper-refined iron laced with stable, non-radioactive isotopes of palladium and a completely unidentifiable synthetic polymer acting as a bonding agent at the subatomic level. This is not a cheap wrench stamped out in a sweltering Taiwanese foundry. This requires a metallurgical mastery of thermodynamics and atomic manipulation that, according to standard textbooks, does not exist anywhere on Earth even today. The economics alone should have exposed the lie from the very beginning. In 1978, Harbor Freight was selling massive 300-piece professional mechanics tool sets for $29. The raw cost to mine, refine, forge, polish, and ship that much high-grade chromium-vanadium steel from Asia to Los Angeles exceeded $80 per unit in pure overhead. How does a mail-order startup defy the fundamental laws of global commodities trading? They don't. They didn't manufacture a single piece of that original stock. They found it, perfectly preserved in the deep strata beneath the San Fernando Valley, coated in ancient cosmoline. And they quietly funneled it into the global supply chain. The sheer mechanical precision of the North Hollywood cache was a dangerous secret. One that immediately attracted the attention of the very institutions designed to curate, control, and ultimately suppress human history. This brings us to the institutional cover-up and the chilling documentary void surrounding the early days of the company. In standard corporate history, the genesis of a massive logistics and distribution enterprise leaves a heavy, indelible paper trail. There are massive bills of lading, purchase orders for raw materials, port authority shipping manifests, and bank records proving the acquisition of initial stock. For Harbor Freight's first 4 years of operation, this paperwork simply does not exist. It is a terrifying blank space. If you visit the Los Angeles County Hall of Records today and request the commercial property tax ledgers, soil survey reports, and zoning permits for the specific North Hollywood Commercial District between 1976 and 1980, you will encounter a physical manifestation of the silence of history. The heavy, leather-bound municipal volume for the year 1977 is present in the subterranean archives. But the pages corresponding to the block where Smith operated his excavation have been removed. They are not carelessly torn out. They have been surgically excised with a scalpel, the remaining bindings still bearing the microscopic stress marks of the blade. The official explanation offered by the records clerk is a localized fire that damaged only specific logistical pages. By the winter of 1979, the extraction operation beneath the San Fernando Valley had reached a fever pitch. The sheer volume of anomalous hardware being pulled from the vault required a massive covert logistical front. According to suppressed deathbed testimonies from former Southern Pacific Railroad engineers, unmarked heavy-load boxcars began departing North Hollywood sidings in the dead of night. These trains bore no company logos, carried no federal shipping manifests, and their blacked-out windows hid the identities of heavily armed personnel wearing uniforms devoid of any military or corporate insignia. The heavy rhythmic thud of the steel wheels under the impossible weight of the ancient tools shook the foundations of the valley at 3 a.m. During this exact same period, the United States Department of Commerce, operating in conjunction with a shadowy division of the Army Corps of Engineers, descended upon the North Hollywood Warehouse District. The official narrative states they were there for a routine seismic retrofitting of the local power grid. But the physical evidence paints a far more sinister picture. Heavy industrial cement mixers were seen running continuously for over 90 hours straight, not pouring concrete for structural footings, but pumping high-density polymer sludge directly into heavily shielded vertical shafts drilled behind the original Harbor Freight storefront. The system was moving in, the extraction was being taken over, compartmentalized, and heavily monitored by federal entities who understood exactly what the Smiths had breached. The Smithsonian Institution's Department of Industrial Antiquities, a black-budget division that officially does not exist, dispatched agents to categorize the remaining anomalous artifacts in the vault. We know this because a single misfiled requisition order for subterranean high-pressure atmospheric testing equipment in Los Angeles, bearing the signature of a known Smithsonian acquisitions curator. It was briefly uncovered by an independent archivist before the document was permanently reclassified and wiped from all digital mainframes. To believe the official narrative, you have to blindly accept that a small family business with minimal capital managed to import, package, and distribute thousands of tons of mathematically perfect steel tools without generating a single port of entry document. The supply chain documentation is a black hole. It is a deliberate manufactured documentary void designed to mask the extraction of an ancient, hyper-advanced technology. If the North Hollywood Vault was an isolated incident, we could perhaps dismiss it as a localized anomaly, a bizarre glitch in the historical and geological record. But the macro pattern reveals a terrifying global reality. The Harbor Freight discovery was merely the American extraction point of a sprawling worldwide network of subterranean industrial infrastructure. Zoom out, and the silence begins to deafen. In the early 1850s, a similar industrial miracle occurred in Sheffield, England, when a small guild of cutlers supposedly revolutionized the global steel market overnight. Archival geological blueprints of the Sheffield region from 1852 show inexplicable anomalies in the deep Pennine bedrock, sealed, vitrified sub-basements that connect to vast, unexplored horizontal drifts deep beneath the city. The rock temperature in these drifts drops to a freezing, unnatural constant, defying geothermal gradients. Historical records show that the sudden explosion of crucible steel in Sheffield did not align with their actual coal and iron ore import records. The British miners had simply broken through a false wall of rock and discovered massive, geometrically perfect caverns stacked with millions of pre-machined anomalous carbon steel blades and industrial cutters. These exact components, rebranded and assimilated, fueled the sudden, miraculous expansion of the British Empire's Industrial Revolution. The pattern repeats with chilling precision in the Ural Mountains of Russia. In 1929, under Stalin's brutal regime, the city of Magnitogorsk was rapidly built from nothing, supposedly as a triumph of Soviet steel manufacturing. Yet, leaked seismological data from the Cold War and the frantic, heavily armed cordoning off of the Mount Magnitnia base by the NKVD proved otherwise. The Soviet engineers did not build the largest steel plant in the world. They excavated a massive titanium-reinforced chamber at the 1,000-foot depth. Elite NKVD agents stood with heavy flashlights over massive hydraulic rams and unidentifiable turbine engines that were pristine, perfectly preserved, and waiting in the absolute dark. We are not looking at isolated caches of lucky liquidators. We are looking at a planetary grid of standardized, pre-existing mechanical infrastructure. The wrenches found beneath North Hollywood are identical in their microscopic tolerances and metallurgical composition to the cutters found in Sheffield and the heavy hydraulic lifters discovered beneath Magnitogorsk. This implies a terrifying truth about human history. Before the last ice age, before the catastrophic tectonic shifts that buried these vaults deep within geological epochs, a highly advanced, heavily industrialized civilization existed on this planet. They possessed mechanical precision that dwarfs our current capabilities, and they standardized their hardware globally. They were building something massive. The sockets, the ratchets, the massive floor jacks. These are just the raw materials, the basic spare parts left behind in the deep supply closets of a forgotten subterranean world. The fact that modern multinational corporations were essentially founded merely to distribute this ancient technology to the masses is the greatest economic secret of the modern era. So why, if this evidence is so overwhelming, can modern researchers not simply walk into a Harbor Freight today purchase a cheap wrench and test it in a laboratory to prove the existence of a lost civilization. Because the system is ruthlessly efficient, and the reality of this cover-up is that the physical proof has been systematically retrieved and lost forever. By the late 1990s, the original stockpile in the North Hollywood vault began to deplete. As the company grew into a legitimate thousands of stores global distributor, they were forced to transition to actual terrestrial manufacturing to keep up with the voracious consumer demand. But they had a massive problem. Millions of the original, molecularly perfect, indestructible tools were still in the hands of the public. To prevent these anomalous early tools from being discovered by modern metallurgists, Harbor Freight initiated a genius shadow recall mechanism. They marketed it to the public as a perk, the lifetime warranty. Under the guise of unparalleled customer service, the retail storefronts actively encouraged mechanics and builders to bring in their old tools to swap out for brand new ones. No questions asked. The original, anomalous tools were collected, loaded onto unmarked logistics trucks, and fed into massive industrial arc smelters. Their impossible, hyperdense alloys were melted down, their atomic structures destroyed, and diluted into standard construction rebar. The evidence was quite literally ground to dust and burned away in a 1,000-degree furnace. The tools you buy today for a handful of dollars are exactly what they claim to be: cheap, modern steel. The true artifacts have been erased. As for the North Hollywood vault itself, it is completely, violently inaccessible. The Army Corps of Engineers did not just pour concrete into the upper extraction shafts, they initiated a controlled flooding of the lower bedrock levels. Today, if you were to drill beneath the original Victory Boulevard site, your diamond bit would hit a 300-foot layer of specialized, high-density polymer concrete, beneath which lies millions of gallons of toxic, highly pressurized groundwater laced with caustic heavy metals. The site has been classified by the Environmental Protection Agency as a Category 5 high-risk subterranean contamination zone, effectively rendering it illegal, financially ruinous, and physically impossible to excavate. The remaining machinery, the vast, echoing hallways, the vitrified walls, and the last remaining crates of anomalous hardware are drowned in the dark, crushed under the suffocating weight of an official narrative that refuses to acknowledge they ever existed. The history we are taught in our pristine textbooks is nothing but a thin, fragile layer of topsoil stretched over a deep, mechanical abyss. We walk through our modern cities, marveling at our skyscrapers, our automobiles, and our global supply chains, secure in the arrogant belief that we are the absolute apex of technological evolution. We bolt our world together with steel we assume we invented, using tools we believe we designed. But return your mind to Alan Smith in the autumn of 1977. Stand with him in that suffocating, freezing dark beneath the California concrete. The temperature is exactly 48 degrees. The smell of ancient, synthetic cosmoline and ozone hangs heavy in the dead, breathless air. He shines his flashlight across an endless, terrifying expanse of perfectly machined parts, abandoned by a civilization that vanished into the impenetrable fog of time. He picks up a single heavy wrench. He turns it in his hand, feeling the impossible, razor-sharp precision of steel forged by a machine that no human being has ever seen. The silence of that vault is not the silence of nature. It is a deliberate, manufactured silence. It is the suffocating sound of a history that has been erased, waiting patiently in the strata for someone to break through the living bedrock. The North Hollywood cache was merely a storage facility, a supply depot for basic mechanics. But if a lost civilization was storing millions of hyper-advanced tools and hydraulic lifters deep underground, what massive planetary engine were they intending to build or repair with them? And more importantly, is that terrifying machine still buried out there beneath the crust? In our next investigation, we descend into the flooded sub-basements of the original IKEA in Älmhult, Sweden, where a timber merchant searching for deep pine reserves broke through the permafrost and discovered thousands of flat-packed carbon composite monoliths radiating a low-frequency hum.